Did you know werewolves like fried chicken? I mean, I'm not surprised. Who doesn't like fried chicken, after all? Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your currently sick host, Darkness Prevails. Don't worry, it's pretty mild. And today I've got an assortment of scary stories of real encounters with the unknown, featuring such tales about the Bray Road beast, the most disturbing funeral home, and more. Enjoy these stories and send me yours so I can narrate them in the future at darkstories.org. And go to creepycampfirestories.com and pre-order my upcoming book, Creepy Campfire Stories, if you haven't already. Available at your favorite bookstore, coming out July 8th, 2025. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's begin. Beast of Bray Road. From Bo. I used to think people made this stuff up. Monsters and cryptids and strange creatures that lurk in the dark. Fun for ghost stories and campfire tales, but not something that actually happens, I thought. Not in the real world. Not to people like me. That changed one cold night in late October. I was working the closing shift at a diner in Elkhorn. It was just past 11 p.m. when I finally clocked out. The roads were dead quiet. No traffic, no street lights once you got out of town. I took the back way home down Bray Road. It was something the locals whispered about, sure. The kind of stories you'd hear in middle school. The Bray Road beast will get you. But I never gave it much thought. That night, though, there was fog. Thick, wet fog clinging low to the fields and creeping across the road. My headlights barely cut through it. I turned the radio down. It just felt wrong, like the static and the music were disturbing something or drawing its attention. It was then that I saw something. A flash of fur, just a blur, then a heavy thud against the front of my car. I slammed my brakes. My tires screeched against the pavement, and I came to a shaky stop. My first thought was that I'd hit a deer. I was scared, but I needed to check. I stepped out of the car. I soon found the animal. It had been a raccoon, I think. At least it looked like one. But it was mangled, like something had gotten to it long before my vehicle did. I knelt to get a better look. And then I heard a noise. A heavy rustling sound, like something big moving in the brush. Not a squirrel or rabbit. This was something massive. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I froze for some reason. Whatever it was, then stepped out. For a moment it reminded me of a bear. But bears, even on two legs, do not move that way. They don't have shoulders that broad or legs that long. This creature was about 6.5 feet tall, with a body covered in dark, thick fur, but it walked on two legs, like a man. The head was like that of a wolf, with a long snout and sharp teeth and ears that twitched at every little sound. And the eyes were a horrible, evil-looking yellow, and they were locked onto me, like I was prey. I didn't move. It crouched down almost casually, picked up that dead raccoon with a clawed hand. Then it stood upright again, towering and watching. We stayed like that for a heartbeat. After a few moments, my limbs finally kicked into gear. I stumbled backward to my car, never turning away from it. I managed to yank the door open and dive inside, slamming the lock down. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the keys. When the engine roared to life, I floored it. That should have been it. I should have left it behind, but when I checked the rearview mirror, it was chasing me, running on two legs, long loping strides that ate up the distance between us in mere seconds. I was going 55 and 60, then 70, and still it kept up. Its glowing eyes were locked onto mine through the mirror. Then just as suddenly, it peeled off into the cornfields beside the road, vanishing like it had never been there. I didn't sleep very well that night. For a long time, I didn't even tell anybody. But later on, when I began to hear the local talk about it, other people, farmers and teenagers, even a police officer, I paid more attention to the stories. The stories from people who had seen it too. Some folks even found claw marks on their barns. Others said livestock had been found partially eaten. A few had their own stories of seeing a creature standing upright on the side of the road. They call it the Beast of Bray Road, and by now, I'm sure you've heard of it. These days, every time I drive home late at night, I take the long way around. I avoid Bray Road like the plague. I don't care what anyone says. I saw it. It saw me, and I'm sure it remembers. Werewolf ate my fried chicken. From Daniel 56382. I still don't know what we saw that night. And to be honest, I'm not sure I want to. All I know is it started with fried chicken. I was with M, my best friend since the 8th grade. We had just finished another endless Tuesday shift at the factory, sweaty and oil-stained and absolutely starving. You ever get the kind of tired that just sinks into your bones? That's where we were. The only thing keeping us alive was the idea of something greasy, salty, and dipped in sauce. So naturally, we pulled into the KFC on the edge of town. I'll set the scene. This KFC isn't your standard strip mall variety. It's set a little off Route 17 just before you hit the state forest. An old building, red roof chip with peeling sunburn. Parking lot always half empty, lit by flickering halogen poles that hum louder than they probably should. The woods loom right up behind the building, like the forest is trying to take it back for itself. But they made the chicken fresh, which is rare, so we didn't complain. We ordered a bucket, 12-piece extra crispy, 2 biscuits each, coleslaw and mashed potatoes too. I still remember how the box was warm in my lap as we sat on the hood of his rusted-out Honda, our legs dangling over the edge. The air was cooling down then, late spring chill setting in, and the smell of fried food curled around us like a blanket. "I'm telling you," M said, mouth half full, "if I win the lotto, I'm buying a whole darn franchise, just so I never have to wait in line again." I laughed and sipped at a flat Pepsi. "You wouldn't make it a week. You'd eat the profits." He held up a thigh like a trophy. "Worth it." We were mid-bite when we heard it. A branch cracked. It was heavy. We turned toward the tree line. The woods behind the KFC are dense and dark even in daylight. At night, they look like they go on forever, and from those woods, something stepped out. It was a shadow at first, broad and tall, but when it moved closer, we saw it fully. It was no man. Not entirely, I guess. Not a wolf either. This thing was about 7 foot, easily. Its arms were thin and stretched, hands tipped with black claws. The thing had thick and patchy fur from head to toe, and gray that turned into white across its chest, matted in places. Legs were bent like an animal's, but it was walking upright. But somehow I knew that the eyes were human. They looked tired, but also hungry. M dropped his biscuit, which hit the road with a thud. The creature turned its head right to us. Neither of us moved. It didn't growl. It didn't charge. It stood there and stared, only 20 feet away. Eventually, M whispered, "What the heck is that?" "I don't know," I said. "Don't move." The creature sniffed the air, slowly and carefully, then took one step closer, then another. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until my vision got all spotty. My hands were slick with chicken grease and sweat. The creature looked at the bucket between us, then back at me. think it's hungry, I said. Im blinked. You're not serious. But I was already sliding off the hood, moving slowly like you would around a stray dog. I grabbed a drumstick from the bucket and held it out, arm extended, like some weird fast food peace offering. I know, in hindsight, this is the stupidest thing to do, and I'm not sure what compelled me to do it. But the beast tilted its head, nostrils flaring. Then, with surprising delicacy, it stepped forward and took the drumstick from my hand. Not snatching, but taking. I felt claws brush against my fingers. They were cold, and flakes of dirt brushed off them. I can't believe I actually freaking touched it. It backed up a couple steps, then sat down, the way a raccoon would sit. Then right there on the cracked pavement, it began to eat. We watched it, just stunned. It didn't gobble or tear either. It ate like it had all the time in the world, didn't even break eye contact. Im whispered, "Are we high?" "Unless we're sharing the same hallucination, I think this is real," I responded. The creature licked its lips, made a low, satisfied sound like a grunt. Then it looked back at the bucket. We handed over 2 more pieces, a thigh and a wing. It reached out slowly each time, careful like it knew sudden moves might scare us off. After the 3rd piece, it stood, looked at both of us again, and gave a small yip like some sort of happy dog. Without a sound, it turned and walked back into the woods, like a person. Just like that, it was gone. We sat there for a while after, not saying a word, and eventually Im said something. "We never tell anyone about this. They're gonna think we're nuts." "I know. You gonna tell anyone?" "Nope. Me neither." He looked at the bucket, still half full. Still hungry?" "Kinda." We finished the bucket in silence, left the bones in the box, wiped our hands on napkins that did nothing, and drove home in the dark. The next day we came back, same time, same KFC, same order. We left a couple of extra pieces on the edge of the lot, near the trees. They were gone by morning. We never saw the creature again, but me and Im still talk about it often. I know feeding it was stupid, but to be completely honest, I didn't feel pure terror when I saw it, like many people might say in these encounters. I felt a sort of respect and fascination, I guess. Like when you see a lion or a tiger. You aren't necessarily scared, unless it's ripping your throat out, but you respect it, and you keep your distance. I think Im felt the same way. I know it may not be the most intense or interesting experience, but it does get you thinking. Maybe these monsters are also just creatures trying to get by. Its face showed pure emotion on it, and I won't be forgetting it anytime soon. The Long Man, from arandomguy. This happened about 2 years ago in 2023, when COVID was dying down and I was 18 or 19 years old. I moved into a new house with my girlfriend. This house had 3 bedrooms and a big porch, where you could just sit down and chill. The backyard was small with a trampoline that we were going to take apart and give away to some charity, so we had more backyard space. A few months later, we took it down and shipped it. The night we did, I heard footsteps from the backyard going onto our porch, and then they stopped. Then it sounded like something was climbing the wall. I heard this noise like tap, tap, step, step, over and over, about 15 times, until they stopped right at my window. My heart and mind were racing by that point, thinking of logical explanations for these noises. A bird or a bat, maybe a small land animal, climbing up the outside wall. But that did not explain the footsteps. And then came the knocking, over and over again. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at my window, but even though my blinds were semi-see-through, I couldn't see a shadow through the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut immediately, waiting for hours in the dark, knuckles tapping at glass, keeping me awake. In the morning, when orange light burst through my blinds, the tapping had stopped. I got out of bed and looked out bravely and saw something that still haunts me today. It was a very long and lanky arm, with a really pale-looking hand, and it seemed to be wearing a tattered suit. I saw the arm being dragged around the corner off my porch steps, but I could not see the body, or anything else, as it was already around the corner. I closed the window, but of course I did the thing that starts all horror films. I forgot to lock it. When I told my girlfriend about it, she didn't react very much, said I was hallucinating from being so tired, as I'd had a 12 a.m. late shift at work from the night before. 6 months later, I was sitting on my sofa watching TV, as my girlfriend was with her friends somewhere, when I heard footsteps on the roof right above me. I knew it was that same long man again, and of course I was terrified, but it was on my roof, and what harm could it do if it was there? And that's when it hit me. I have a second floor, and I don't usually open windows, so I'm not really used to locking them up there. I began to panic. I ran out of my house, frantically running to my neighbor's place, starting to spam their doorbell. Fortunately, they were home, and extremely ticked off when they answered. I yelled at her to call the cops because someone had broken into my home. As she ran back in, I looked at my house, and I saw half of its face peering from below the window, its eyes looking straight at me. Or that's what I think it was trying to do, because it didn't have eyes. It looked more like just sockets. Its hair was just about 10 strands of hair going in all directions, and it had very pale skin, the same color as that hand I saw before. My neighbor came back saying that the cops were on their way, and that it would be about 5 minutes. When the cops showed up, they searched my house, then came back saying that they didn't find anything, just an open window. They asked me to come with them to see if any valuables were taken. So we did a scan of the house, but nothing was out of place. The police told me that it was probably a burglar that got in, but didn't find anything up there and heard me downstairs, so quickly decided to get out rather than risking getting caught. I knew it wasn't a burglar. They don't look like that. People don't look like that. And I knew whatever that long man was, it wasn't looking for valuables. It had to be a UFO. From Flower Mama 7. It was a little after 10 p.m. the night before school started, in August 2015. My teenage daughter had gone to Albuquerque with her boyfriend, along with his mom and sister to get some last-minute school shopping done. We lived in a very rural area about 10 miles down Highway 84 from Romeroville, on the outskirts of Las Vegas, New Mexico. I don't mind saying where we lived at the time. We've since moved away. I had to pick up my daughter at the gas station, where Interstate 25 and Highway 84 meet up. That was always the meeting spot between town and our house, because we lived so far out in the middle of nowhere, and people don't want to drive all the way out there to just pick up or drop off a kid. I was getting into my SUV, and I noticed a faint red glow far off over the hills. I thought it was strange. I began to drive slowly down my driveway, which was about a half-mile long. I was somewhat keeping an eye on that red glow. I got about halfway down the driveway when I realized the red was flashing lights. It looked so strange. I stopped the vehicle and called my husband to tell him about it, and also to have him on the phone with me when I got all the way down to our gate. As I was creeping forward, the lights were coming more and more into view. I was starting to get scared. This did not feel right. When I finally stopped at our gate, I saw a sequence of flashing red lights on top of the plateau across the street. There were about 5 to 7 large red lights, flashing one at a time in a row. They flashed like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. I got goosebumps all over. I tried to think about what they could be, a logical explanation. There was a road that zigzagged up the side of the hill to the top, where there were some cell towers and electric poles, so maybe it was emergency vehicles or a roadblock of some sort. But really, there was no way it could have been either one of those things. The lights were much, much too large to be anything like that. Any trucks driving up there in daylight always looked so small and far away. These red lights were huge. It was so weird and out of place with them blinking in a row, one at a time like that. It wasn't something I'd seen any emergency lights around here do. Plus, if there was some sort of emergency going on up there, I'm sure there would have been more activity. Sirens, maybe? Other emergency vehicles, fire trucks or police, something. Not even any vehicles passed by on the highway while I sat there. It was just me and those big blinking red lights. It was really frightening. My husband was still on the phone comforting me and wished me luck before we disconnected. I was afraid to get out to open the gate, but I had to get my daughter. So that's what I did. The whole thing lasted about 15 minutes. It was a quiet night otherwise. I think I only passed about 3 cars on my way to the gas station. My daughter was already there waiting for me, so she got right in, and while we were heading back home, I told her all about it. I was kind of expecting to see it there just like when I left, but I didn't see anything as we got close. I pulled up to our gate, but it was gone. We didn't pass any emergency vehicles, or even any big rigs on our way home. It couldn't have been anything other than a big old UFO with huge blinking red lights on top of that plateau. Now I really wish I'd taken a picture or a video of it. I didn't. At the time, I was too scared. Stupid maybe, but I remember thinking that maybe I would be abducted if I took a picture. I've seen some really creepy and strange things in my life. Even saw a UFO 2 other times, but I'd never seen anything quite like this before. Strange Sounds from Eden. I'll start by saying that this is only one of many stories I have. I've experienced strange things since I was small, and a lot of them involve other people, so I know it's not just my imagination or me hallucinating. This story, though, is the one that still makes me tear up if I think about it too long. It happened in 2 parts, really. It began when I was about 12 or so. My father spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, so we moved a few times growing up. Not as much as a lot of other people, but still plenty of times. We had just moved back to the area I was born in, and my parents were looking to rent a house so that we didn't have to live in military housing. We looked at a few places before finally settling on a house the start of this story takes place in. The house was small. My parents had their room, my brother had his, and I shared a room with my sister, the same way things had been set up for most of my life so far. The house was in a nice and quiet suburb that I would take regular walks through. It was a good and safe neighborhood. My biggest concerns were starting at a new school in the middle of the year, and whether or not I'd get to stay in band. My brother was the first to experience anything weird in that house. This was especially strange, as we lived in places before where everyone experienced something unusual except him. He said he would hear voices at night, people talking down the hall in the living room, but when he'd go to look, no one was ever there. We didn't write him off exactly, but because no one else had experienced anything yet, and it was just strange voices, we all chalked it up to dreams or maybe even neighbors outside. That was until this night. I was having a nightmare. I've had nightmares regularly since I was young, a consequence of unrelated trauma. This one seemed different from my usual nightmares. Almost every nightmare I've ever had takes place in a location entirely made up for whatever I'm dreaming that night. This time, however, I was dreaming of the house I was in. I was lying in my bed, staring at the doorway. I could see my brother's bedroom across the hall and the bathroom next to it. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life. Suddenly, just outside the doorway, an angel lamp my mother had appeared. The lamp had always been present in my life. My grandfather had a matching one in his house, so I was very familiar with it. It looked almost like stained glass, and the angel held up a lute. In the dream, the angel sat motionless until it began to grow larger and larger. Soon it took up the entire doorway, a huge change from the near foot it had been before. For some reason, this terrified me. That was when the noise began, a large, heavy, and deep tone that rattled me. I woke to the sound of my sister screaming in the bed right next to mine. Our parents rushed into the room, and the whole time she kept mentioning the sound I'd heard. It wasn't just in my nightmare. It had been real. Our parents had heard it too. Our father checked the house, looking in every room and then outside. He told us it was probably just a glitch from his fancy home theater speakers. But I knew that wasn't true. We all did. But it was an explanation rooted in reality and reason. So we left it at that. Fast forward 10 years. I was visiting my family from college, something I could only do occasionally because my school was 6 hours away, and I didn't have a car. The house my parents lived in was a nice place. They'd moved into it after I left for school, so for me it was unfamiliar, but I liked it well enough. Plenty of odd things happened in that house, but I really don't know if they were related to this particular event or not. There were 2 full baths in the house, but the master bath included a huge tub, big enough for me to sink into completely with room to spare. The bathroom was at the back of the bedroom, which was the farthest room from the front door. Strangely, it matched the first incident in that way. My bed was against the wall with a window, the furthest from the front door I could have been. Anyway, I was in the bath, relaxing. I had my phone with me. Don't judge, I never dropped it in the water and mostly just scrolled Tumblr before getting washed up. So I wasn't paying much attention to the world outside my little screen. That's when I heard a knock. I thought it was from the bathroom door and assumed it was one of my parents, maybe one of my siblings. "What?" I called. No answer. I repeated myself louder, but still nothing. I texted our family group chat. "Was someone at the door? I thought I heard a knock." A moment later, the reply. "We're all in the backyard." Strange, I thought, but oh well. We had 3 dogs, so it easily could have been one of them. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't seem right. Was it a knock on the bathroom door? Maybe it was an animal on the roof. The longer I spent trying to puzzle it out, the more uneasy I felt. A thud against the window made me freeze. I wouldn't have thought much of such an innocuous sound if it weren't for the fact that, although the window sat just above the toilet on the inside, on the outside it was impossible to reach without a short ladder at the very least. I stared at the window, watching as though I could see anything through the blinds. Then came a sound that chilled me to the bone. It's hard to describe. It wasn't that booming single tone I'd heard before. It was a wailing like a deer, but not quite right. It rose and fell like a siren, but it was mixed with a garbled sound, like it was 3 sounds at once played over each other. Something about whatever this sound was made me feel like I was in danger. Never before this, and never since, have I felt so much like prey. When it comes to fight or flight or freeze, I've always been a freezer. I sat in the bath with my heart racing, every sense tuned into that sound and whatever was outside that window. I waited and waited, bracing for more. Eventually, curiosity won out over fear. It's always been my fatal flaw. It felt like it had been an hour, but according to my phone, it had only been about 5 minutes. I climbed out as quietly as I could and peeked through the blinds, opening them only enough for me to see outside. There was nothing. There was no deer, no sign of anyone, and no sign of anything else. I texted my family again, asking if they'd heard that. They had no idea what I was talking about. I thought they might have been playing a prank on me. They were fond of doing that, after all. I went out to the backyard, expecting them to laugh about how they scared me. No one did. In fact, they thought I'd gotten out of the bath after I'd texted them the first time. They've always owned up to pranks. What's the fun, after all, if I don't know it was them playing tricks? Besides, like I said, other strange things happened in that house. It wasn't the last time I was scared half to death in those walls. I haven't heard anything strange like that since. I've experienced bad drug trips. I briefly struggled with exploding head syndrome, and I've had plenty of scary things happen otherwise. But nothing has filled me with such a primal fear as these two incidents. The most common answer I've gotten is sky trumpets, especially since the first incident started with a nightmare about an angel with a lute. I'm not a Christian, and I haven't been for a long time, so I'm not sure how much stock I put into angels blaring trumpets. I've also had people suggest not deer and certain unsavory creatures you should not mention by name. I really don't know what it could be. The incidents happened 10 years apart, and it's been 6 years since the last. I can't help but worry that in 4 more years, I'll hear something again. Beside a funeral home. From RuralMythos. I've lived in my house for decades, and for as long as I can remember, the building next door was an abandoned funeral home. I say was because about a year ago, that changed. It started with vans pulling up at all hours, renovations, and fresh coats of paint. Within months, the decaying structure, once a splintered, broken place with shattered windows, was transformed, restored to its former glory, ready for business once again. Then came the ornate new sign on the lawn, Lucian Funeral Home. At first, I wasn't thrilled about living next to a functioning funeral home, but I told myself it was better than the alternative. At least it was no longer a crumbling, haunted-looking husk. And for a while, it seemed normal, almost pleasant in a way. But I never could have imagined that the beautiful, polished version of that building would terrify me more than the abandoned one ever did. And yet, here I am, praying every night that it shuts down again, that the people running it pack up and leave, that the building is left to rot until it finally collapses into an empty lot. At first, the only unsettling thing was watching them bring in the bodies. My back porch faces the side of the funeral home where they unload them. There's no proper loading bay, just an elevated double door, and they only bring the bodies in at night. Sometimes when I go outside for a smoke, I see them pull the hearse around, backing it up to the building. As it gets close, the double doors swing open. A man inside reaches for the stretcher, pulling it smoothly into the building. There's some kind of rail system on the floor that it slides into. It's morbid, I know, but how can you not take a peek? That's how it started. Just the occasional guilty glance while I smoked. One night, I had a rough day. stressful enough that I stepped outside for a second smoke much later than usual. It was brutally cold, but I bundled up and took my usual spot on the porch. I wasn't looking at the funeral home this time. Instead, I was scanning the tree line, searching for the little rabbit that sometimes nibbles on the lawn at night. I took a slow drag from my cigarette. Everything else was dark. Then, in an instant, the entire backyard exploded with light. The floodlights from the funeral home, ones I'd only seen used a handful of times, blazed to life, as bright as midday. Squinting, I turned toward the building. A figure emerged from the back door, the same man who usually unloaded the bodies. But this time, he wasn't pushing a stretcher. He was dragging something wrapped in a white sheet. I watched, frozen, as he trudged across the lawn, tugging the sheet-covered bundle behind him. He stopped halfway between the building and the tree line, then simply left it there. Without hesitation, he turned and walked back inside. What the heck had I just seen? The obvious questions flooded my mind. Why is he out so late? What's under that sheet? And more importantly, why did he just leave it there? I stood and stepped toward the edge of the porch, squinting and trying to make out any details. The sheet flapped in the breeze, revealing nothing. Whatever was inside, it was small but heavy. The way he dragged it made that much clear. Then, without warning, the lights cut off. Darkness swallowed everything. A long moment passed, then I flicked my cigarette into the grass and turned toward my door. Whoosh, the floodlights roared back to life. I whipped around. The yard was empty, and the sheet-covered bundle was gone. From that night on, it became a pattern. Once a week, always on Sundays, the man would emerge in the dead of night. He would drag something wrapped in a sheet to the same spot in the yard, turn off the lights, and when they came back on, the sheet would be gone. At first, I tried to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But then I noticed something else. Every Monday morning, just after dawn, he would walk into the woods bordering our properties, carrying an empty black trash bag. A few minutes later, he would reappear, the bag now full. At some point, curiosity turned to paranoia. I just had that sinking feeling that something wrong was going on. Was it organ harvesting or some kind of drug exchange? The possibilities were there. Each one in my head was worse than the last. I knew it sounded crazy, but not crazier than a man dragging a sheet-wrapped bundle into his backyard, which then proceeded to vanish into thin air. I had to know the truth, so I made a plan. Next Sunday, when he brought that sheet into the yard and shut off the lights, I would be ready. This time, I wouldn't just be peeking from my porch. I'd be there, waiting and watching, and I'd finally see what or who was taking it. Sunday night came. I waited in my shed, hidden in the shadows of my backyard. The cold was brutal, making my fingers numb even with my gloves on. I must have smoked half a pack too, my nerves rattling. I'd been out there for hours. The later it got, the more I doubted myself. Maybe it wasn't going to happen tonight, I thought. Maybe I should just go back inside before I froze to death. But just as I started to rise, slivers of light sliced through the cracks in the shed's walls. My breath stopped. It was happening. I pressed my face to the wooden slats and peered through the gaps. There he was, the man, dragging that same sheet-wrapped shape. Excitement and dread twisted in my gut. I was really doing this, and soon I'd find out the truth. As he disappeared back inside, the floodlights cut out, plunging the yard into darkness. This is it, now or never. My mind screamed at my body to move and to sprint, but for a split second, I hesitated. Then my courage took over. I burst from my shed, feet pounding against the ground as I raced across the lawn. Reaching the side of the funeral home, I pressed my back against the wall. I peered out into the backyard. There was no moon tonight. My eyes were still adjusting, but I could just make out the pale outline of the sheet-wrapped object lying in the grass. No movement, no sound. I expected it to simply vanish before my eyes, to dissolve into nothing. But then something shifted near it. Then another and another. Dark shapes low to the ground, barely taller than the thing wrapped in the sheet. They had no distinct features, just shifting silhouettes in the dark, circling the bundle like vultures. For a few long seconds they moved, silent and methodical, and then they blurred together, merging into a single writhing shadow. And then, nothing. The movement stopped. The shapes disappeared. I squinted into the black, but the yard was too dark, trying to process what I'd just seen. I was then blinded when the floodlights roared back to life. I flinched. When my vision cleared, my stomach lurched. The yard was empty, and the sheet was gone. Confusion twisted into fear, then nausea. I pushed off the wall and sprinted back to my house, heart pounding. The second I was inside, I slammed the door shut, twisting the lock with shaky fingers. I paced about the living room, every few minutes peeking through the blinds at the funeral home's yard, hoping I wouldn't see something that I could not explain, or perhaps hoping to see something that could explain what I saw. But I was no closer to understanding than before. The only thing I knew for sure was that more than one person was taking whatever was left in that yard. But their size, well, they were small. They must have been hunched down or maybe crawling. Yeah, that had to be it, I thought, crawling on hands and knees. That's the only thing that makes sense, I told myself. For hours, I sat on my couch, running through endless scenarios in my mind. Was it some kind of ritual? A black market deal? Something worse? My exhaustion eventually caught up to me, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. I was awakened by a loud knocking. Groggily, I sat up and rubbed my face. I saw sunlight through my blinds. It was morning. The knock came again. Still half asleep, I shuffled toward the door, then stopped cold when I glanced out the side window. My breath caught in my chest. It was him, the man from the funeral home. What do I do? I couldn't ignore him. He'd already seen me look out the window. He knew I was home. Did he see me last night? Is that why he's here? No, he couldn't have. It was too dark. He was already inside when I ran over. I forced myself to stay calm. I took a breath and opened the door, doing my best to feign ignorance. Hey, what's up? I asked, keeping my tone casual. He gave me a friendly smile. Sorry to bother you so early. I work next door, he said, nodding toward the funeral home. I was hoping you could help me out with something. I swallowed hard, but kept a straight expression. Sure. With what exactly? Well, last night we had a trespasser, he said, his smile never faltering. Our side camera caught someone skulking around the building. It looked like they came onto the property from your side and left the same way. He paused and studied me. I know you sit on your porch at night to smoke, so I was wondering, did you see anything? My heart pounded against my ribs. No, sorry, I said. I didn't notice anyone last night. It was quiet around here, same as always. His smile faded. For a long, uncomfortable moment, he just looked at me, like he was studying my face and searching for something. The silence stretched on, until eventually, finally, he spoke. Oh well, figured as much, but I wanted to ask anyway. His eyes flicked past me, scanning my home for a moment. I shifted, blocking more of the doorway. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't be of more help. Do you have a description of the guy? Maybe I'd recognize him. He shrugged. Not really. The cameras aren't the best, so we couldn't make them out too well. A small wave of relief loosened my chest. So he didn't get a good look. Maybe you should call the cops. Someone else in the area might have noticed something you didn't, that I didn't. At that, his gaze snapped back to me, and his smile returned. Wider this time, but something about it still felt off. No need for that, he said smoothly. Besides, I prefer to handle things in-house, if you know what I mean. I swallowed. He let the words hang between us for a moment, before adding, but if you do see anything, let me know. I tolerate a lot, but not this. Funeral homes are no place for prying. He continued to smile, but the meaning was clear. Without a word, he turned and walked off my porch, not bothering to excuse himself. I shut the door the second he stepped off and locked it behind him. I knew exactly what he was trying to do. Intimidate me, scare me into minding my own business. But if anything, it had the opposite effect. Now more than ever, I needed to know what was going on. Without wasting any time, I decided to go straight into the woods. It was still early, maybe he hadn't been out there yet. If I moved fast, I might be able to find whatever he was retrieving, or at least something that could shed light on this. I pulled on my boots, slipped out the back door, and stepped into the dense tree line that bordered our properties. The forest was easy to navigate this time of year. Most of the undergrowth was dead, and the ground was littered with fallen leaves. My footsteps crunched softly as I moved deeper, scanning the forest floor for anything that might have been strange. I then noticed them. Faint drag marks. Here and there, the leaves had been disturbed, pushed aside, like something heavy had been pulled through. The trail wasn't perfectly clear, but it had a direction. I kept losing and picking it back up, following the subtle signs as best I could. After several minutes of tracking, the marks led me into a small clearing. At the clearing's edge, something caught my eye. An old, rotting set of wooden bleachers. The once blue paint curled and flaked away in strips, revealing splintered wood beneath. I moved closer. The drag marks continued, leading under the bleachers. I crouched down and peered into the shadows beneath the wooden seats. There it was, a white sheet torn to shreds and soaked in what appeared to be blood. Tangled within the fabric were ripped pieces of plastic, also stained red. The ground beneath was dark, damp, and disturbed, like something had been violently ripped apart there. My mind racked in my skull looking at it. It looked like something from a scary movie. Then I noticed something else. Tiny bloody handprints smeared across the fabric, and surrounding the sheet, imprinted in the blood-soaked earth, were small footprints. Dozens of them, no bigger than a toddler's. My brain struggled to perceive the horrifying scene before me, but before I could think too much, I heard it. The sound of leaves and twigs crunching underfoot. Someone was coming. The noise came from the direction I had just come from. Panic surged through me. I could not be seen here. I bolted out of the clearing, ducking behind a tree just as the footsteps grew closer. Pressing my back against the rough bark, I held my breath, and I listened. The footsteps stopped briefly, then resumed. Slow, deliberate. I risked a glance around the trunk, just enough to see. It was him, the man from the funeral home. He walked into the clearing, heading straight for the bleachers, a black trash bag clutched in his hand. I snapped my head back behind cover, heart pounding. For a few agonizing moments, I listened as he rustled around beneath the bleachers. Then his footsteps started up again, retreating back the way he came. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Only when I was absolutely sure he was gone did I finally step out from my hiding spot. Moving cautiously, I made my way back toward the bleachers, checking over my shoulder with every step, paranoid that he might be watching. When I reached the spot where the bloodied sheet had been, I crouched down and peered underneath. It was gone. The sheet, the plastic, every trace of the scene I had just witnessed. Even the dirt had been disturbed, kicked around and brushed over, hiding the blood and erasing the tiny footprints. It was like nothing had been there at all. I made my way out of the woods and back to my house. My mind was a storm, and I was freaked out. That was 3, maybe 4 months ago now. Since then, I don't go outside much anymore, especially not at night. I avoid my porch, my backyard. I do everything I can to pretend that cursed place next door does not exist. But it's getting harder to ignore, harder to push it all to the back of my mind. Because ever since I stepped into those woods, I think I've started to hear things now. Things at night. And it's getting worse. On occasion I've heard knocks at my walls or scratches at the windows. Even footsteps on my roof. I don't know what's going on. I just know that I live next to a funeral home that's been feeding something. And now I think I've ticked it off. It won't leave us alone. From Grayson. This story happened when my wife, Alexandria, and I were in our early 30s. We had recently gotten married and moved in together, finally. It hadn't even been a month before we both said we had started to hear weird things. Alexandria had said she'd heard knocks on the doors when no one was there, or saw things move on their own. We expected the house to be haunted. I mean, it was built in the late 1890s, so we thought nothing of it. Little things kept happening for months, like our phones might end up in the living room, or the fridge door will open on its own. These experiences were minor, until we hit the 1-year mark. We soon found out that my wife was pregnant. The entity didn't seem to like that fact, though. The activity got worse. Not only did they happen more often, they started to harm us. Especially Alexandria. She would wake up with bruises and scratch marks. She told me that she oftentimes felt like something was choking her in the middle of the night, leading her to have red marks on her neck as well. It got so bad to the point we had to leave. We moved in with her parents and stayed there until the baby was born. We didn't want to risk her getting more hurt or the baby getting hurt. We soon were able to find another place to live that was suitable for our budget. But it didn't seem to help. Not long after we moved into the new place, we thought that everything was going to go back to normal. But little things kept occurring, same as before. Our cabinet doors began to open on their own, or the faucet would turn on and off. But like the old house, things progressively got worse. My wife started to wake up with bruises again, and so did I. Now with the baby, since we have to get up in the middle of the night more often, we seem to be getting double the amount of bruises than before. Soon enough, we noticed that our son had large red marks on his right arm. He didn't seem bothered by it, but we were worried. It was hurting both my wife and I, and now our child. We took him to the doctor, and luckily it seemed to just be a mark. No pain and nothing serious. Even so, we didn't want to risk him actually getting hurt. So the only logical thing we could think to do was to move back in with my wife's family. Luckily, they allowed us to stay as long as we needed. They understood our concern with the current situation. We stayed for around a year, hoping that we could escape whatever was hurting my family. Alexandria's family is Christian, which leads me to think that we're dealing with a demon, or something of the sort, because we've been just fine staying at their place. No bruises, no phantom movements, nothing. After a while, we tried once more to move into a different house, and yet again, it didn't work. The bruises came back, along with the feeling of being choked and the red marks. And just as before, we had to move back in with Alexandria's parents. We even tried to go to an apartment, but that didn't work either. Alexandria's parents suggested we start praying, so we tried that as soon as we found another house. Every time we felt that choking sensation, we would utter a prayer, and each time it replied with the same unearthly loud screaming. It would make my ears ring after the few seconds that felt like hours each and every time. But even after we prayed, it never seemed to stop. These experiences happened about 9 years ago, and we honestly just decided to move in with Alexandria's parents for good. They were cool with it, and ever since, we've been safe. Our son is a safe and healthy kid, and he doesn't remember any of this, like Alexandria and I do. Stay safe, y'all. You never know what you could be dealing with in this world. How far would you go to protect your family from the unexplained? From something that follows and haunts you that you may not even be able to see or touch? I think those parents out there like myself, we'd probably be ready to die for our kids. At least then, I'd be on equal terms with that thing that's been haunting us, and we could go toe-to-toe. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. Feeling a bit sick tonight, so I'm gonna cut this one short. I'll see y'all again next time. Until then, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.